As you can see, we are right in the middle of hurricane and tropical storm alley. And I'm going to talk about how we as a regional planning organization have used some of the tools that have already been described, along with others, to try to mitigate the hazards that we face being right here on the edge. A little bit about our organization. We are a voluntary association of governments. We have no regulatory power. We have no bonding authority. But what we are is a convener and a coordinator, and I hope a floater of good ideas that can be debated and refined and ultimately put into action. Just a little context, our population, were we a state, would rank us number 15, and our land area in our 13-county area is about the size of the state of Connecticut. And we have nearly 2,000 miles of shoreline, either on the Gulf of Mexico or in the various bays that surround us. And we are quite a low relief coast. You can see here the threats from storm surge under different categories of hurricanes. And I'll just note that back in 1900, Galveston was the largest city in Texas. That, I believe, remains the largest natural disaster in terms of loss of life. And in fact, our region has been growing away from the coast since that time. However, the coast is moving back to meet the people in some areas. This map shows coastal erosion, particularly along those barrier islands. And you can see that while a few places in the green are actually gaining coastline, some are eroding at a rate of above 15 feet per year. Now, one of the things that has been a lot of use for our planning is we've got much better forecasting tools, both in terms of hazards and in terms of where we expect population to be. This map shows the population that is currently located in one of those surge zones. While it's only about 25% of our region as a whole, it's still over 1.5 million people, so a significant number of people in harm's way. Looking at our forecast for 2040, again, you can see that hazard zone, if you will, is actually losing a share of the population, but will be up above 2 million people by that time frame. So considerable threat to that population economy structures. The most recent experience we've had with an actual storm surge was back in 2008, Hurricane Ike, which I believe is the third highest storm in terms of value of property lost. You can see one of those coastal barrier islands, the Bolivar Peninsula, was almost completely wiped out by Ike. I think Ike was a big wake-up call for this region to really look at all we can do to mitigate those hazards, both at the very fine-grained local level as well as some larger storm defense systems. I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the projects H-GAC, the Houston-Galveston Area Council, has led during that time. We are just now kicking off the third iteration of a FEMA-funded regional hazard mitigation plan. We've done it twice before, and we've had 77 of our 13 counties and 71 of the cities participating. Basically, this plan involves a comprehensive vulnerability analysis, not just of coastal hazards, but also drought and wildfires and other threats that we face. Resulted in a total of 852 discrete actions by those 78 participating jurisdictions. One of the things I'll point out, though, is in the last update we did, only about 20% of those actions had actually been implemented. So these things take time. More on that later. Also, post-Ike, our board of directors basically authorized us to convene what we called the Foresight Panel on Environmental Effects. This was really a group of local scientists and some leaders in infrastructure to present some adaptation recommendations for our region. One thing I would like to note, as was alluded to earlier, is we don't use the term climate change in the title of the report. That's a pejorative term in the view of some. But I think there was broad consensus on the fact that we ought to be at least using credible predictions of future weather in our planning and design. really the lowest hanging fruit is how can we avoid hazard-prone areas in our planning, looking at longer-term reinvestment horizons, particularly with some facilities that may be in harm's way that will have to be fortified or relocated. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, do we have mechanisms in place that can actually implement and build these projects, particularly if we anticipate that the availability of funds from the federal government may be static or even diminishing over time? We also, about 3 years ago, concluded a regional plan for sustainable development. This was funded by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and we really had a very open funnel of what all of our local governments considered to be the issues and threats faced by the region. And resiliency came up as one of the 6 big ideas out of the nearly 200 that we considered that proved to be the ultimate focus of this plan. Give you a thumbnail of some of the categories of this, but one of the things that the plan led to was our conducting a series of case studies. And one county that we have that doesn't really have a coastal barrier island on its Gulf frontage is Brazoria County, and they were really interested in looking at how could they integrate their long-term parks planning with using ecosystem services as a storm defense strategy. So I think we've talked a lot about structural and policy issues, but really looking at a design with nature approach is going to be key where the topography and geography warrants. Now, in terms of actual hardscape capital projects, this is a picture of the Galveston seawall. It runs about 10 miles. It's 17 feet high. And the thing I want to note here is construction began on the seawall back in 1902, about 2 years after the major storm. It was funded entirely with state funds. It's been added to again in the 20s and then again in the 60s, but just the speed of response to developing this sort of storm defense system was much faster than it is today. But Hurricane Ike really got a lot of people thinking about, have we done enough? And certainly there is interest in avoiding that surge zone, but there's a lot of investment already there. I'll give full credit to Dr. Bill Merrill at Texas A&M University Galveston, who really looked at what would an extended Galveston seawall, along with a storm surge gate at the mouth of the Houston Ship Channel do in terms of protecting lives and property in those high-risk surge areas. This became popularly known as the Ike Dike, which is a memorable title, I will say. Interestingly enough, at the same time, the Severe Storm Prediction, the Speed Center at Rice University, developed a variant of this, but it was a little bit less of a heavy structural approach involving a system of levees, some seawall expansion, and then some more natural defense features such as some in-bay construction of and restoration of oyster reefs and ecosystem services. And over time, the Texas, by executive order of then Governor Perry, a 6-county Gulf Coast Community Protection and Recovery District was formed. And basically this group sought to incorporate some aspects of each of these concepts into really a comprehensive study that the state could really coalesce around and seek both federal funding and be a focus of state and local investment. This report has basically concluded its initial assessment of some of these structural alternatives. They're right now involved in doing an environmental assessment, but the Texas House of Representatives, Texas Legislature has passed a resolution that is now going to seek federal funding for continuing this project and also seek to really work on finding who would be the local implementing partner for this work. In addition to capital projects, I want to call attention to what's being done in the academy here in our region. We've got a number of our own locally developed hazard mitigation planning tools. One was developed by the Texas Sustainable Coastal Institute at Texas A&M University Galveston. So this is similar to some of the features that have been demoed before, but really it's a way of looking at rolled up vulnerability assessment from a variety of coastal hazards and overlaying against various infrastructure, landscape and natural features data, as well as demographic and cultural data, to really give local governments or even just private citizens the ability to see what some of the risks and vulnerabilities that their communities may face are. And then in a much more interactive approach, this was done by the Texas Coastal Watershed Project, which is a unit of Sea Grant and the AgriLife Extension at Texas A&M. This Community Health and Resource Management, or CHARM model, utilizes ArcGIS, Community Viz, and WeTable technology. The nice thing about this is participants can really get their hands on the maps and look at the various impacts of different growth scenarios, and they'll get a real-time readout on the number of structures that would be at risk, increase in impervious surface, and the like. And so I think particularly working and planning at the local level, as was said before, having those numeric outputs that really put some more weight to some of the policy decisions is very important. I think that's the way we're going to be moving in our local planning. I guess I'll close by saying, just like getting that stranded cow off of the deck, these things take time. I'll go back to the Galveston seawall. It's amazing thinking now that that construction was begun 2 years after the storm event. We're almost 10 years after Hurricane Ike, and we're really just at the point of developing a consensus solution, let alone finding the funding and actual implementation. Same is true of many of the policies in our mitigation plans. It's hard to program particularly expensive capital improvements into capital improvement programs, into budgets, into elective terms of office. So I think the three keys I'd like to leave with is we now really have, I think, the tools and the data available. We can't say we're not aware of the challenges ahead. I think we need to move into that developing consensus, particularly at the regional scale, on what are the solutions that we can all get behind, and finally, what are the funding mechanisms and phasing, priority setting that we need to do to put them into action. We've got some catching up to do, but I think we are picking up speed. I'll leave you with, and these will be posted, I assume, with links to all the reports that I have cited. And thank you for your time, and look forward to the panel section.